Your badge is deactivated. Leave the building. CEO Catherine Monroe said it in front of the entire lobby security team, but David Mercer did not argue. The 45-year-old single dad quietly removed his security badge, placed it on the desk, and started toward the revolving doors. Then he stopped. Across the glass entrance, a delivery van had pulled into the employee drop-off lane without a company placard, and the driver was watching the security cameras instead of the loading dock. David turned back. Don't open the west service gate. The security director frowned. You've been fired, Mercer. David kept his eyes on the van. Then ignore me after you lock that gate. Catherine folded her arms. This is exactly why we're here. You keep making decisions outside your authority. Yes, ma'am. And now you're doing it again. David glanced toward the service entrance. Because somebody needs to. 2 hours earlier, he had stopped one of Catherine's senior executives from entering a restricted elevator after the man's temporary badge failed verification. The executive complained. The security director called it embarrassing. Catherine called it poor judgment. David had refused to make an exception without confirmation, even when told the man worked directly for her. That refusal had cost him his job. He needed the paycheck badly. That morning, his 13-year-old son, Noah, had found the electric bill beneath a stack of mail on their kitchen counter and quietly returned $20 from his school field trip envelope. David had pushed the money back toward him. That's yours. We're late again. I'll handle it. How? David had zipped Noah's lunch bag and handed it over. That's the dad part. His old gray pickup needed brakes, the refrigerator made a knocking sound every night, and yesterday at the grocery store he had put coffee back on the shelf so Noah could keep the new sneakers he needed for school. None of that changed what David believed about the job. A locked door mattered only if somebody was willing to keep it locked when pressure came. Now, outside the corporate tower, the suspicious van remained in the drop-off lane. The driver checked his phone, then pulled forward toward the west gate. David walked to the reception desk instead of leaving. Call loading services. Ask if they're expecting that vehicle. The younger guard hesitated. The security director snapped, Don't take instructions from him. David stepped away. Then make it your instruction. Catherine watched him carefully. There was no anger in his face. No satisfaction. Just concentration. The guard made the call. Loading services answered almost immediately. No delivery was scheduled. The van moved again. This time the driver approached the intercom at the west gate and held up what looked like a contractor credential. David's eyes narrowed. Zoom the camera. Why? Catherine asked. Badge is the wrong color for this quarter. The security director looked at the monitor. Could be an old credential. Then he should know it won't open that gate. David reached for nothing. He no longer had authority. Instead, he took one step back and said, Lock the inner service door too. Catherine finally nodded to the guard. Do it. The magnetic lock engaged just as the outer gate opened a few inches under a remote override request. The van driver saw the inner door secure, abandoned the attempt, and drove away. Security recorded the plate number. 10 minutes later, facilities confirmed that no contractor matching the credential had been assigned to the building. Catherine looked at David differently now. How did you notice the badge? Wrong color. And the cameras? He looked at them before he looked for the loading entrance. Most guards wouldn't catch that. David picked up the lunch bag he had left beside the desk. Most guards probably would if people listened to them. Then his phone buzzed. Noah was waiting in the middle school hallway because basketball practice had been canceled early. David checked the time. I need to go. Catherine stared at the man she had just fired, then at the locked service door behind him. She had dismissed him for being too cautious. Minutes later, that same caution had exposed a real security problem. And one question now followed him through the lobby. What kind of security guard learned to read danger before it even reached the door? The next morning, Catherine asked security to hold David's termination paperwork until the attempted entry from the west gate was reviewed. She did not call him back to work. Instead, she requested the incident footage, access logs, and every contractor badge issued that month. By noon, One fact was clear. The credentials shown at the gate had been copied from a legitimate vendor who had not been scheduled in the building for weeks. The security director called it a minor breach attempt. Catherine was not convinced. That afternoon, David stopped at the tower only to pick up the small toolbox and family photo he had left in his locker. Noah waited in the gray pickup outside, finishing math homework with a basketball on the seat beside him. As David crossed the lobby, a woman carrying a toddler struggled with a stroller near the revolving door. One wheel caught against the metal threshold. David set down his toolbox, steadied the door, and guided her toward the wider accessible entrance. "Thank you," she said. "No problem." He never noticed Catherine watching from the mezzanine. A few minutes later, an alarm chirped near the visitor elevators. A maintenance worker had propped open a secured stairwell door while moving equipment. The younger guard started toward it, but David stopped him with one sentence. "Check who's already inside the stairwell before you close it." The guard frowned. "Why?" "Because if someone entered while it was open, locking the door only traps the problem inside." The guard checked the camera feed first. A delivery contractor was on the landing, confused and looking for the loading dock. He was escorted out without incident. The security director arrived irritated. "Mercer, you don't work here anymore." David nodded. "I know." "Then stop directing my staff." He asked what I saw. No, he didn't. The younger guard looked uncomfortable. "Actually, sir, I was about to shut the door." Catherine stepped closer. And David's suggestion prevented us from losing track of someone inside a secured area. The director's jaw tightened. Or he got lucky twice. David picked up his toolbox. Could be. There was no challenge in his voice. Outside, Noah had come into the lobby carrying David's forgotten thermos. "Dad, you left this again." He noticed Catherine and gave her the cautious look of a child who knew more than adults expected. "You're his boss." David answered before she could. "Not anymore." Noah looked at the toolbox, then at his father. "Because he stopped that guy yesterday?" Catherine said quietly. "It's more complicated than that." Noah nodded. "Adults say that when they don't want to say they were wrong." "Noah, sorry." But Catherine did not seem offended. She looked at David instead. "Does he always notice everything?" Noah shrugged. "Dad does. He checks exits when we go to restaurants. He knows when cars follow too long. He makes me sit where he can see the door." David's expression changed slightly. "That's enough, buddy." Catherine heard it anyway. Later, she requested David's complete personnel history. Most of it was ordinary until an older background document surfaced under a shortened agency name. National Emergency Protective Services, Field Response Certification. Several entries were sealed behind archival verification, but one line remained visible. Advanced Civilian Evacuation and Threat Assessment. Catherine stared at the words, then replayed the lobby footage from both incidents. David had never moved like a man guessing. He had been reading the room before anyone else knew there was something to read. By Friday morning, Catherine had asked David to return to the building for one reason only: review the west entrance procedures before a scheduled investor event. The security director, Martin Shaw, was not pleased. "He's not staff anymore." Catherine kept her voice even. "Then treat him as a consultant for 1 hour." David arrived in the same dark security jacket, without a badge, and studied the lobby without touching a single control panel. He noticed that temporary event passes were being printed at one desk while catering vendors entered through another. "Too many access points," he said. Martin frowned. "We've handled events bigger than this." David looked toward the elevator bank. "Then you know crowds hide mistakes." He recommended moving all vendors through the loading entrance, separating guest check-in from employee traffic, and keeping one elevator locked for emergency use. Martin objected to every change. Catherine approved them anyway. That afternoon, the first real test came early. A fire alarm sounded on the 23rd floor after a catering warmer overheated near a conference room. Smoke was light, but dozens of guests rushed toward the elevators. Martin ordered security to clear the lobby and wait for the fire department. David looked up at the camera monitors. Don't send everyone down the same stairwell. The alarm is above them, Martin snapped. Exactly. People from 3 floors are already feeding into stair A. David pointed toward the building map. Open stair C for floors 18 through 22. Keep stair B for firefighters. One younger guard hesitated. Catherine said, "Do what he says." The crowd began moving in 2 directions instead of 1. Within minutes, the stairwell pressure eased. Elderly guests were escorted through the shorter route, and emergency crews reached the affected floor without fighting against people coming down. The fire department later confirmed that the split evacuation had reduced congestion. David accepted none of the praise. He spent 10 minutes helping an older receptionist find her purse, then checked the lobby doors before leaving. Outside, Noah was waiting beside the gray pickup with 2 paper cups from a diner across the street. "Hot chocolate," he said. "You look like you forgot lunch again." David took 1 cup. "You're becoming expensive." Noah grinned. Catherine had followed them outside. "Your father just reorganized an evacuation in under a minute." Noah looked unsurprised. "He used to practice that stuff with me when I was little." David gave him a quiet warning glance. "Practice what?" Catherine asked. Noah shifted the cups in his hands. "Finding exits. Staying low. Knowing who to follow if everyone else panics." David opened the pickup door. "Enough, buddy." But Catherine had heard the change in his voice. This was no longer about an observant guard. Later, she received another fragment from his archived. Background check. Years earlier, David had served as a lead field coordinator during a downtown mass evacuation exercise involving hospitals, schools, and corporate buildings. His name appeared beside one notation: primary responsibility, civilian movement under active threat conditions. Martin read the same document and dismissed it. Old training doesn't make him management. Catherine looked through the glass wall toward the lobby. No, but today it made him right. Then another report landed on her desk. Someone had attempted to access the executive floor twice using credentials cloned from legitimate contractors, and both attempts had occurred before David ever returned. The danger was not following him into the building. It had already been there, waiting for someone trained enough to see the pattern. Catherine did not wait for another incident. The next morning, she asked David to review executive floor access before a weekend family reception the company was hosting for senior staff. Martin objected before David even arrived. "You fired him for crossing authority lines. Now you want him designing them." Catherine looked at the 2 clone credential reports on her desk. "I want the person who noticed the pattern." David entered without a uniform this time, wearing a plain navy jacket and carrying a small notebook. He walked the executive corridor once, checked stairwell doors, service elevators, camera angles, and the children's activity room being prepared near the conference center. Then he stopped beside a storage hallway. "Move the kids' room." Catherine frowned. "Why?" "Too close to a service corridor with 3 blind turns and 1 badge-controlled exit." Martin shook his head. "That door is secured." David looked at him. "So were the credentials somebody copied." Catherine ordered the activity room moved beside the main reception area, where 2 staffed entrances and clear sight lines could cover it. Martin's irritation became visible. "This is becoming ridiculous." David closed his notebook. "Then you won't mind if nothing happens." Later that afternoon, Noah met his father outside a hardware store near their apartment. David was replacing the worn brake pads on the gray pickup himself to save money. Noah handed him a socket wrench before he asked. Catherine, passing nearby after a meeting, recognized them and stopped. "You do your own repairs?" "When I can." Noah smiled. "He fixes everything except the refrigerator." "The refrigerator has opinions." Catherine laughed, then noticed David's phone alarm labeled school pickup, 3:20. "You schedule that?" she asked. David wiped his hands. "I schedule around it." Noah looked at her. "Dad used to miss pickups when I was little." David's expression tightened slightly. "Noah, I mean before Mom died." Catherine's face softened. Noah continued more carefully. He had one of those jobs where emergencies meant he could disappear for a day or two. After she died, he stopped taking work that could call him away anytime. David took the wrench from his son. That's enough history. But the explanation landed harder than any resume. He had not settled for security work because he lacked ambition. He had chosen predictability because his son had already lost one parent. That evening, Catherine asked him to stay 10 extra minutes to review the weekend reception plan. He agreed only after calling Noah and confirming a neighbor could cover the short delay. David pointed to the revised floor map. Keep children and family guests inside these 2 zones. No temporary vendors above the 10th floor. If a badge fails twice, stop treating it like a technical problem. Martin entered midway through the review and placed a new memo on the table. Corporate security had decided to replace several manual checks with remote credential verification for the reception. Faster, Martin said. David read the memo once. It also creates 1 point of failure. The system is certified. Systems don't notice when behavior changes. Catherine looked between them. Keep the manual checks. Martin's mouth tightened. You're choosing a fired guard over my department again. Catherine answered calmly. I'm choosing the recommendation with fewer assumptions. After Martin left, David noticed one more attachment beneath the memo. A contractor access request submitted for the reception using the same vendor company whose credentials had been cloned earlier. The request had already been approved electronically. David circled the company name. Who verified this? Catherine checked the authorization trail. Martin's office had. For the first time, the security problem no longer looked like random probing from outside. Someone had learned how the building trusted people, and the weekend reception would place employees' families inside that trust. By Saturday afternoon, the family reception was underway, and David stood just outside the main conference area with no uniform, no badge, and no official title. Catherine had asked him to stay as a temporary safety advisor while the company reviewed the contractor issue. Martin had objected, but Catherine kept the manual checks David requested. That decision mattered within the first hour. A catering vendor arrived with a valid company name, a correct vehicle number, and credentials that passed the remote system. David watched the man approach the service elevator, then stopped him. Which floor are you assigned to? The vendor hesitated. Executive reception. Which room? Another pause. David looked at the security desk. Call the catering supervisor. Martin stepped over. His badge cleared. His answers didn't. The supervisor confirmed that no additional vendor had been sent. The man was escorted from the building without incident, and police later learned the credential had been copied from a legitimate subcontractor. For the first time, several guards who had once dismissed David began checking behavior as carefully as badges. Catherine watched the change spread through the team. David did not take credit. He simply adjusted the guest flow so families stayed within clear sightlines and made sure the children's area remained near staff doors. Midway through the reception, Noah arrived carrying a paper bag from the diner across the street. You skipped lunch again. David accepted the sandwich. You keeping records now? Somebody has to. Catherine smiled as she approached. Noah noticed her looking at David's handwritten evacuation notes. He used to make maps like that all the time. David's face changed. Noah. But Catherine asked gently, for what? Noah glanced at his father, then answered carefully. Before Mom died, Dad worked emergency protection. Not mall security stuff. Big events. Hospitals. Evacuations. He'd disappear when something went bad. David looked down at the folded map. That life didn't fit anymore. Noah's voice softened. He came home after Mom's funeral and put all his old gear in the garage. He told me I was never going to wonder which parent was coming back. Catherine said nothing for a moment. Then she looked at David with a kind of respect that had nothing to do with his resume. You gave up that career for him. David shook his head. I chose my son. The distinction stayed with her. Later, corporate records finally verified more of his background. David had once coordinated civilian movement during high-risk evacuations involving schools, hospitals, and executive facilities. One archived recommendation showed he had been considered for a regional crisis leadership position. He never accepted it. That solved one mystery, but created another. What had happened on his final major assignment that made him walk away completely? As evening approached, two warning signs appeared. First, the security system logged another contractor credential attempt near the executive floor, this time from inside the building. Second, Martin quietly authorized remote access for a maintenance team scheduled to return after the reception, despite David's request that all after-hours access be manually verified. Catherine discovered the approval and confronted him. "Why override the check?" Martin answered. "Because we cannot run this building on one man's suspicions." Before she could respond, a new alert flashed across the security monitor. One of the cloned credentials had just opened a restricted service door near the underground parking level. David looked at the floor plan, then toward the elevator bank. "Lock the family floors. Keep everyone where they are." Catherine asked, "What do you think this is?" David's eyes stayed on the map. Not random anymore. And for the first time, the danger seemed to be moving toward the people they had worked hardest to protect. The alert from the underground parking level triggered a response before anyone had time to debate David's instincts again. Catherine ordered the family floors held in place while David guided the security team through the garage access map from the conference room. He did not ask to lead. He simply pointed out that the cloned credential had opened a service door connected to 3 different routes: the loading dock, the executive elevator, and the private parking level. "Close the routes, not the people," he said. Martin wanted the entire garage locked down, but David shook his head. "If someone is already inside, that traps employees with them." Catherine backed David's plan. 2 guards secured the stairwell exits while facilities kept one monitored path open for anyone leaving. Within 20 minutes, they found a portable badge reader hidden behind a utility cabinet near the private elevators. It had been wired to capture access data from legitimate cards passing through the area. No one was hurt. No family member was isolated. The reception ended early but safely, and for the first time that week, the building seemed to breathe again. The police took the device. The cloned credentials were disabled, and corporate IT forced a full reset of contractor access. Martin called it proof that the threat had been contained. Catherine was less certain, but she could not ignore what David had just prevented. Before he left, she handed him a temporary consulting credential. "Until the review is finished, I want you involved." David looked at the badge but did not reach for it immediately. "I need to know the hours." Catherine almost smiled. "Because of Noah. Because I'm his father before I'm anybody's security plan." She nodded. "Daytime only unless there's an actual emergency." He accepted it. Outside, Noah was waiting in the gray pickup with the diner sandwich David had never finished. When he saw the credential clipped to his father's jacket, his face brightened. "So you're hired again?" "Not exactly. Close enough to buy groceries?" David laughed softly. "Close enough to start." On Sunday afternoon, they replaced the refrigerator. Relay together at the kitchen table, using a $20 part David had found at a hardware store. For the first time in weeks, the refrigerator stopped knocking. Noah opened it twice just to hear the silence. Monday looked promising. Catherine formally asked David to help rewrite contractor entry procedures and scheduled a meeting about a permanent emergency readiness role. 2 guards who had once ignored him now asked for his opinion before changing an access route. Even Martin stopped arguing in front of Catherine. Felt briefly as if the worst had passed. Then Catherine's assistant brought her a system audit from the weekend. One access query near the private parking level had been made using David's new consulting ID after he had already left the building. A second log showed the same credential probing the executive floor permissions. Catherine stared at the screen. Across the hall, Martin was already reading his own copy. By the time David arrived for the morning meeting, the badge that had seemed like a second chance was about to become evidence against him. By Monday morning, David's temporary credential had been frozen. Martin's complaint had reached corporate legal, But the larger problem was an access log showing David's consulting ID had queried Catherine's private parking level shortly before the cloned reader was recovered. Catherine stared at the report. "Did you access this?" David read it once. "No," Martin stood across the table. "The system says otherwise. Then preserve the raw logs before anyone changes them." David did not defend himself further. Catherine had watched him protect people repeatedly, but this involved her daughter. Caution was no longer theoretical. "Until we verify it," she said quietly, "I can't let you inside the security network." David removed the temporary credential and placed it on her desk. "That's the right call." The answer unsettled her more than anger would have. Outside, Noah waited in the gray pickup before school. He saw the empty clip immediately. Again, David started the engine. "They have something they need to check." "Something you did?" "Something with my name on it." Noah looked toward the tower. "Are you going back?" David was silent for several seconds. "Not if being there puts you or anybody else in the middle of this." The decision cost him the consulting pay, the chance at benefits, and the first real professional future he had seen in years. Still, he drove Noah to school instead of returning to argue. At the tower, Martin restored the company's standard security structure and ordered staff not to contact David directly. Catherine agreed to the restriction while forensic review continued. She hated it, but protecting Claire required evidence, not instinct. That afternoon, Claire left a tutoring session on the 19th floor with a company escort. The private elevator suddenly rejected both their badges. Martin redirected them through a service corridor toward another elevator. The same kind of route David had repeatedly warned could isolate people behind controlled doors. Then the building's access system began cycling locks after a remote software reset. Claire and the escort became trapped between two secured sections with no direct route back to the public floor. Catherine called security. "Get my daughter out." Martin's team began working the electronic controls, but the reset had also disabled several camera feeds. Across town, David was waiting outside Noah's middle school when his old phone received a message from the younger lobby guard. "Claire stuck service corridor 19. Cameras down." David stared at it. Noah climbed into the pickup and saw his father's face. "Her?" David nodded. "Go," Noah said. "I can ride home with Mrs. Alvarez. I told you I'd pick you up. You did. I'm picked up." Noah handed him the truck keys he had just set on the seat. "Now go help somebody who can't leave." David looked at his son, then called Catherine rather than driving blindly. "Don't move Claire until you tell me exactly which doors are locked." Catherine's breath caught. "David, you're not authorized." "I know." She gave him the corridor numbers anyway. As she spoke, an old memory sharpened. David's final major protection assignment had also involved civilians trapped when automated access failed during an evacuation. Afterward, he had left field response rather than keep bringing that life home to Noah. Now the same pattern was unfolding around Catherine's daughter. Then Martin interrupted with worse news. Claire's escort had heard someone testing a locked service door from the other side. David looked at Noah. His job, reputation, and access were gone. But the reason he had once walked away from crisis work was now the reason he could not ignore one. David reached the tower without a badge, without a contract, and with no promise that anyone inside would trust him. Catherine met him at the lobby doors herself. "Claire is still on 19, she said. "The service corridor is locked at both ends." David looked at the floor plan on her phone. "And the person outside the door?" Security lost the camera feed. Martin moved toward them. "He is not authorized to enter." Catherine turned. "I am authorizing him now." David raised one hand. "Only if building security stays in command. I'm here to get Claire out." That was the difference between pride and responsibility. Upstairs, Claire and her escort remained behind a fire-rated door, while someone tested the handle from the opposite corridor. David recognized the layout immediately. Years earlier, his final crisis response assignment had involved an office evacuation where an automated access failure trapped civilians between electronically controlled zones, while a threat moved through service corridors. Afterward, He had helped rewrite procedures around one principle. When the network becomes unreliable, people must have a physical escape path that does not depend on the same system that failed. Do not chase the locks, David told Martin's control room. Take the system out of the decision. He directed facilities to open the mechanical fire release path from stair C, then had security clear the stairwell floor by floor before sending anyone toward Claire. Catherine stayed on the phone with her daughter. You're going to hear someone at the stair door, she said. Don't open until David gives the word. Minutes later, 2 guards reached the secured section from the emergency stair. The person testing the opposite service door fled before police entered that corridor, but Claire and her escort were brought safely into the stairwell and down to the lobby. Catherine wrapped both arms around her daughter. David stood several feet away and checked that the stairwell door had relocked correctly. He did not ask whether anyone remembered firing him. Then the evidence began catching up with the truth. The forensic team reviewed the raw access logs David had insisted they preserve. His consulting credential had never physically entered the private parking level. The query bearing his ID had been generated through the cloned reader recovered during the earlier breach. Its timestamp matched a period when David was documented at Noah's school pickup. Noah provided the simplest confirmation: a time-stamped photo from the school office showing David signing him out while the suspicious access query occurred. Martin's complaint had not created the breach, but his decision to restore remote access and dismiss David's manual safeguards had made the system easier to exploit. Catherine suspended Martin from security authority pending a full review and reinstated the manual controls immediately. Later that evening, she gathered the security staff, legal team, and executives who had questioned David's judgment. Claire stood beside her mother. Catherine did not offer a speech. She placed the cleared forensic report on the table. The accusation against David Mercer was false. His warnings were not. Then Claire looked across the room at him. He saved me because he knew what to do when the system didn't. No one answered. David stood beside Noah, who had arrived with Mrs. Alvarez after school. Catherine faced the man she had once treated as replaceable. I fired you for acting beyond your position. She looked around the silent room. The truth is, his position was smaller than his experience, not his character. And for the first time, everyone who had doubted him understood exactly what they had failed to see. For several seconds after Catherine spoke, no one moved. Then the younger guards who had once been warned not to listen to David began looking at him differently, not with embarrassment, but with respect. David did not ask for his old badge back. He thanked the officers who had helped Claire, made sure Noah was ready to go home, and left the tower without waiting for anyone to explain what came next. The next morning, Catherine called him after school drop-off. I'd like to meet somewhere that isn't my office. David suggested the diner near Noah's middle school. Catherine arrived with a folder and no security team. Martin has been removed from operational leadership pending the final review, she said. His complaint against you is closed. The company is also rebuilding the access control policy around manual verification and physical escape routes. David stirred his coffee. Good. That's all you want to say? If the building is safer, that matters more than whether I was right. Catherine opened the folder. Inside was an offer for Director of Protective Operations and Emergency Readiness, responsible for threat assessment, evacuation planning, staff training, and coordination with corporate security. David read the duties carefully. This is not my old security job. No, Catherine said. Your old job was too small for what you were already doing. He kept reading. 24-hour on-call? Shared rotation. You train 3 deputies, so no emergency depends on one person. David looked up. Tuesday and Thursday school pickup. Protected. Friday basketball. Protected unless there is a genuine emergency. And guards can stop access when something feels wrong without worrying about embarrassing an executive? Catherine nodded. That policy was approved this morning. David closed the folder. Then I'll consider it. He did not say yes until that evening. Noah sat at their kitchen table with homework spread beside the overdue electric bill. David placed the offer between them. It pays more. Noah barely looked at the salary. Will you disappear again? David leaned back. Not if I build the team right. And if something bad happens? Then I handle my part and come home when my part is done. Noah studied him for a moment. That sounds better than pretending you don't know how to do this stuff. David smiled. You've gotten mouthy. Inherited it. The next day, David accepted. His first request was not a bigger office. It was a full review of every stairwell, service corridor, contractor process, and emergency release in the building. He trained guards to question behavior without treating people like criminals, taught supervisors that safety decisions needed reasons instead of ego, and made sure no single manager could quietly override a critical warning. Catherine kept her promise by supporting the changes and staying out of his way when expertise mattered. Claire recovered quickly from the scare. Weeks later, she stopped David in the lobby before leaving with her mother. You always notice exits first? She asked. Most of the time. I do now too. That's not a bad habit. Catherine watched the exchange, then said quietly, Thank you for coming back when I had given you every reason not to. David answered without bitterness. Claire didn't fire me. That was as close to forgiveness as he needed to make it. By the end of the month, the electric bill was current, the refrigerator had finally been repaired, and the gray pickup had new brakes. None of those things changed David as much as one ordinary Tuesday afternoon. He pulled into the middle school pickup lane at 3:18 and saw Noah waiting with his basketball bag. Noah climbed in, checked the dashboard clock, and grinned. 2 minutes early. David handed him the lunch bag he had forgotten that morning. Don't get used to it. Noah buckled his seatbelt. I could. David looked at his son, then toward the road home. For years, he had believed being a good father meant leaving part of himself behind. Now he understood that the better second chance was learning how to carry his quiet strength without leaving his family waiting for him.